Welcome everybody. Thank you for checking out this video. So I am joined by Darren Crouch with Passages International. And Darren, you and I have been connected for a while. We had you on with Barbara Chemist from Cana a few months ago after the inaugural Green Burial Conference. And so this is going to be a reoccurring segment that you and I connect on once a month to really dive in deep to the green movement, what's happening in the space, what's new with green technology, how it's affecting client families that funeral homes are serving, and just the profession at large. But I want you to be able to give your proper introduction. So introduce yourself to the audience.
Okay, so first of all, thank you very much for agreeing to do this. I think it's very forward-thinking of you, of course. I started in the funeral business 20 years ago, back when the cremation rate was 25%, and green funerals weren't even a thing. I mean, if you think back 20 years ago, Whole Foods was in its infancy. The Toyota Prius had just come out, and it was very, very early on. I think, not to toot my own horn, but I think we were a little bit ahead of our time.
Yeah.
But over the last 20 years, we've really focused on sustainable, environmentally friendly, and biodegradable options for funeral homes, whether it's on the cremation side with urns, or on the casket side with natural burial and cremation containers.
Very good. So when you were on the show last, it was right after the Green Burial Conference or the Green Funeral Conference, the inaugural one. Just give me a quick synopsis, recap of that conference, and is that something that's going to be happening annually?
Yes, we are working with Cana to organize another one. We had such a tremendous response, and I think it was really very eye-opening for me to talk to some of the Cana staff and get their feedback in relation with this conference in relation to other conferences they've done. And what really was impressive to me was the level of engagement from funeral directors and from the participants that were there. And it was a really nice mix of people. I mean, there were people there that, have very traditional funeral operations, very traditional cemetery operations, all the way to the other side of the spectrum where people are wanting to open up green cemeteries completely off the grid and 100% natural. And there were various opinions across that spectrum, which was, everyone can learn from that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. That's awesome. We had a great conversation about it, and we've received great feedback from it, from that video. So if you haven't watched that video, go back and look on our channel and find the video a few months ago with Darren and Barbara. So we're in the year 2020 now. Give me, like, where have green burials come and just the green movement up to this point, and then we'll look at what you expect to see in 2020.
Right. Well, I think over the last 3 to 5 years, we've seen a real uptick in demand for our products, in particular our woven caskets for natural or green burial. And it's gone from 1 or 2 inquiries a week to several a day. And we're shipping caskets all over the country, and I think that is a testament to more green cemeteries being opened. It's a testament to more and more people being aware of green or natural options. And I think, the funeral industry is one of those things that, people don't want to talk about death until it inevitably happens. And so a lot of people are not researching what they intend to do when they pass away until it happens. And so for people to really go above and beyond to really seek out these types of options, it really speaks to the passion behind it and the lengths that people will go to accomplish this type of event or service.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, we're getting more eco-conscious as a society and a culture, and that absolutely has to bleed over into the funeral space. So, I mean, we've seen cremation obviously continue to rise, and there's no signs of that slowing down in 2020. So if cremation continues to rise, there's less traditional burial families. What does that mean for green burials and green cremation and the options that families have?
So I'm a firm believer in a lot of people selecting cremation because they were essentially rejecting traditional burial. What they perceive as traditional burial, was it whether it was they didn't like embalming, they didn't like the church service, They didn't like the cost. They didn't like the environmental impact. There's many reasons people were rejecting traditional funerals. And 10 or 15 years ago, the only real option was cremation. And so, I think there is, for cemeterians around the country, I think there's an opportunity to kind of claw back some of those cremation families who never really liked the idea of being burnt, and I've heard that before. But being burnt was better than, rotting in a steel box in just kind of smoldering in a steel box in the ground. Yeah. So, for cemeterians, it enables them to sell a burial, even if it is a natural burial. And I think on the cremation side, and this is one of the reasons that we partner with Cana, is because I think the consumer perceives cremation to be greener.
Yeah.
There's a lot of debate as to whether it is, and obviously there is an environmental impact to the cremation process itself, but the consumer thinks it's greener. And so, for us, it's been very powerful to connect with those consumers and really provide them with products that they can use to achieve a different type of experience that's more along the lines of scattering, for example. I mean, I don't know if you know, but the NFDA Consumer Preference Survey from last year indicated that at least 50 to 60% of families intend to scatter. Yeah. And I think they think of it as ashes to ashes, dust to dust. They think of it as natural, even though they don't come in and say, I want a green cremation or I want a natural cremation. They're thinking about sustainability by the very nature of them selecting cremation.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's interesting. I think you're right. It's kind of like when families come in and say they want direct cremation. That's the buzzword. They have no idea what that really means, and most of them would not choose direct cremation if they knew other options existed. So that's a good point. So I mean, to that point, how can funeral homes stay ahead of the curve and ahead of the times and be prepared to serve green families?
Well, I think one of the things they have to acknowledge the data. 10, 15 years ago, it was just me and a few other people saying, listen, we need to be doing this. Today, the data bears that out. I mean, if you look at that same consumer survey from NFDA, over 50% of consumers would be interested in a greener funeral option. And so, for a funeral director to acknowledge that and say, listen, I need to be aligning with the values of my consumer, and I need to be listening to my consumer. And aligning my products and services to their demands versus trying to jam them into some kind of cookie cutter funeral here at the funeral home. It can't work like that. You know what I mean? I use the analogy of Uber and Lyft and Yellow Cab a lot. And Uber and Lyft still take you from A to B just like Yellow Cab does, but the delivery of that service is completely different.
Right.
And if I were to think back to what Yellow Cab may have said when Uber was starting off, I would imagine they would say something like, nobody's going to want to go from A to B in someone's private car. You know what I mean? It has to be yellow. It has to be a sedan, blah, blah, blah. And I think funeral directors have to be careful. They don't fall into that same mentality where, nobody's going to want to bury their loved one or cremate their loved one without shoes on. Or they have to be embalmed or have to be dressed. And I think, the shift, the value of the consumer has shifted away from, what the body looks like and is it dressed, to remembering that individual and providing a completely different experience that is going to be memorable for the people that attended that event.
That's interesting.
And the products are a means to an end. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? The product is not the central factor here. The product allows people to achieve this memorable experience they want to achieve.
No, that's a great analogy and great point. So to that effect, then, how much influence do you think the family plays in that decision? If a daughter that is 55 is very, green focused, and mom really wasn't, but mom really didn't lay out her wishes, I mean, how much involvement do you think the families are having in that decision when the time comes?
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, my gut feeling is that, green, there are many shades of green. And I think it's not uncommon for someone to be embalmed, placed in one of our wicker caskets, and buried in a concrete vault at a traditional cemetery with a headstone. And, the purists would say, well, that's not green, that's a complete sham. But I think for me, I feel like, well, something is better than nothing. And so people can pick and choose where they want to go green. And, some people are going to go the darkest shade of green, and it's going to be an unembalmed body in a hand-dug grave wrapped in a shroud. And then you're going to have other people that be like, well, I've already purchased my plot at the cemetery. My husband's already buried there, but I want to do something. I'm going to invert a concrete vault. My casket is going to be a wicker casket. It's going to sit on the earth, and I'm going to go back to the earth. And that's kind of a compromise that, a lot of people can live with.
That's cool. All right. So, one of the things that we like to do when we do these videos is we want people to watch this. We want funeral directors to watch this and be able to take some action. So if I'm the funeral director and I'm kind of on the fence of like how I've been thinking about offering green services and educating families on it, what's the first kind of next step? What's step one just to get the ball rolling?
I think doing some research on what's available locally in terms of greener options. I mean, is there a green or natural cemetery nearby? Will your local cemetery do a burial with an inverted vault so the casket can actually sit on the earth and return to the earth? Obviously, as a self-promoter, look at different product options. I mean, if 50% of families are scattering, does 50% of your urn selection reflect that? Mm-hmm. And if not, it's really no wonder that you're not selling urns, because you might have 80% of your urns are bronze and marble and wood and permanent, designed to go in the cemetery niche, whereas 50 to 60% of your families are looking to go and scatter. And so there's this disconnect between what the consumer wants and what the industry is providing. So I would say, get educated, think outside the box, get outside your comfort zone, because the only threat here is really not doing anything and just waiting.
Yeah, and that's how we approach cremation as a profession as well. We're just, it's going to pass. It's a fad. And now it's the number one preference. And right. I think, if we're looking at that, it makes sense, the reasons that you and Barbara and Kana have put together such a great relationship and really bringing some education to the greener side of cremation. That, you made the great point earlier that, families may choose cremation because it's greener and they want other options, and we're just not presenting those other options to them. Right. So great points. I'm excited to carry on this conversation each month and really build upon it. I think it's a conversation that needs to be at the forefront of the profession. We've got to do a better job of serving the needs and the wants of the consumer. And, we do a lot of research kind of on our own on the consumer and the profession, but I think the best research we can do is look at the consumer as a consumer and how they're living their life and how they're buying other products. That absolutely has to bleed into the death conversation and that sequence of in time in their life. And if they lived green, we need to offer greener options to those families. And I love the example you gave of kind of a hybrid green with still an inverted concrete vault. It's a great idea. Both, the individual and the family are getting what they want both, and it's a compromise, but it's still more green than the alternative. So I think you've raised some great points. If anyone has any questions, please comment below, and Darren and I will be monitoring this and following up with you. But all right, Darren, until next month, thanks for coming on the show, and look forward to continuing this conversation.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Ryan.